Welcome to the Lovestead.
Hello, welcome back or to Lady Lovestead Reads. My name is Jessica, and this is my August 2021 reading wrap up. August was a pretty good reading month for me overall. I am going to just skip the stats this month and get right into the books because I feel like it. First, on audiobook, I actually DNF'd The Sociopath Next Door by Martha Stout. Now, there's not necessarily anything wrong with this book. I just am too sensitive and I could not handle the depictions of animal cruelty in this book. Sociopaths, when they're young, start out by torturing animals, and I should have known this going into the book that would be a component of it, and I'm very sensitive to animal stuff, so I had to DNF that one. But like I said, there's not necessarily anything wrong with the book, so if you're not sensitive to that like I am, you might actually really enjoy it. Next on audiobook, I read The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonya Renee Taylor. I give this book 3 stars out of 5. I really like the material that she covered and the way that she covered it. This book is about body autonomy, basically, and embracing all bodies, including, black bodies, disabled bodies, fat bodies, etc. She really goes into detail about why it's important to address intersecting identities and how, if you really want to support body positivity and body acceptance, you have to do so for all bodies, not just one kind of body. I did think that some of this information was derivative and unoriginal, so I did give it 3 stars out of 5. But if you're really not familiar with these concepts and you want a good general overview of things like body autonomy and disability justice and fat justice, then this might be a good book for you. Next, I read Frostburned by Patricia Briggs. This is the 7th book in the Mercy Thompson series, and it is a series that is on my Serious About Series Challenge list for the year. This book is about Mercy and her husband Adam. Adam is the head of the local werewolf pack, and in this story, Adam and his pack are kidnapped. I gave this book 2 stars out of 5. I thought that the action scenes were really not very tense. There was a lot of exposition, a lot of showing and not telling. Also, the kidnapping stuff is getting old. In almost every book in this series, someone gets kidnapped and Mercy has to find them. And that storyline is just getting old. I was hoping to see more of the domestic bliss between Adam and Mercy because they just got married in the last book. And we just don't get to see that. It immediately jumps into the action without a lot of setup. And the action was just so-so. This is probably one of my least favorite books in the series, and like I said, I did give it 2 stars out of 5. Next, I buddy read The Witch's Boy by Kelly Barnhill. This is Middle Grade Monthly's, I believe, April pick, and I'm very behind on Middle Grade Monthly, as is my friend Helen at Helen's Book Haven, so we're trying to catch up together. And so we did buddy read this book together in August. I did give this book 2 stars out of 5. I did not think that this book was a middle grade book. I thought it was more of an adult fairy tale because some of the themes and the scenes in here were really dark, and had I read this as a middle grader, they would have been traumatizing for me. This is about a young boy, and he and his twin brother go out on the river one day in a boat that they have crafted. The boat crashes and his brother drowns, and then everybody in his village thinks that the wrong brother dies and that the twin that survives is the one that should have died. And so this young boy kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of that. He has a very bad stutter. He's kind of clumsy. And his mom is a witch, and she has magic that she keeps in this pot in the basement. And a bandit that lives in a neighboring area has come to steal his mother's magic. And when that happens, things start to unravel from there for our poor main character, Ned. The story in itself was fine. One of the things that I also didn't love about this is there's the story of Ned and, his journey to get his mother's magic back. But then there's also this overarching story of like these two neighboring countries going to war. And I just didn't feel like the storyline about the war needed to be there at all, because the main focus of the book was on Ned and his journey, and the war part just felt like filler to me. I actually think this book would be really good as a novella rather than a 400-page middle grade book. So I did give this 2 stars overall. That being said, I do really like Kelly Barnhill's writing style. She writes in a very lyrical, poetic, and fairy tale-esque way, and I will read more of her work. Dune by Frank Herbert. I read this as part of a buddy read with some of my friends at the Killing Time with Cozy's book club. Most of us in this buddy read do not read sci-fi, so we were really stepping outside of our comfort zone and pushing ourselves to try something new. So I did read this with Storm and Lee and Cheryl, and I think maybe one other that I can't remember. I'm so sorry if I'm forgetting you. But I actually DNF'd this at about 60%, so I read a good chunk of it. But I went into great detail about why I DNF'd this book in a vlog that I did, so I will just link you to that vlog up here if you want to know, in good detail why I decided to DNF it. Ultimately, I DNF'd it because there were just some problematic themes in it. Those problematic areas are very much like of the time of the book. And like sometimes I can look past issues like that and other times I just cannot. And this was one of the times where I just could not look past them. So I did DNF it. Interestingly, it was not the sci-fi elements that did it for me. Like when I went into it, I was like, okay, I'm not going to understand any of this. It's going to go over my head. And I actually enjoyed some of the actual sci-fi parts of it, but it was the problematic elements that were unrelated to the science that made me ultimately not like this story. Next, I read Hollowpox, The Hunt for Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This was also a buddy read with my friend Francois over at Mr. Francie Reads, and I loved this story. So this is book 3 in the Nevermore series, and in book 3 there is a virus that is affecting all the Wanimals in the land, and this book is really interesting in that it's very much in line with things that happened in the year 2020. Even though she wrote it before 2020, it very much lines up with a lot of what happened in 2020 with a virus and a quarantine and protests and unrest, and that was very interesting. Another thing that I really liked about this installment of this series is just seeing Morrigan grow as a person. She's really coming into her own since book 1, and that just brought me great joy. I loved being back with these characters. Jupiter North, please marry me. And then Fenestra. I also need a Fenestra in my life, though I do have 3 cats. None of them are as cool as Fenestra. Shh, don't tell them that. So Fenestra is like this giant cat the size of a horse. And she's just so wonderful. Like every time I read a Nevermore book, she just brings me such joy. Like such childlike joy reading about Fenestra. There's a scene where she is frolicking among snowflakes and things like that. And I just love her. So I gave this book 4 stars out of 5. A 4-star because it got a little bit meandering at times, a little bit off track, but I'm wondering if maybe those points might come back into play in the next book in the series, so we will see. But I will definitely reread this. This series is one of my favorites of all time. 4 stars out of 5. Next on audiobook, I read Sugibane by Douglas Stewart. I read that for the BookTube prize, and I can't say anything more about it other than that because we're not really allowed to talk about books for the BookTube prize until the results have been released. Next on audiobook, I read The Boys in the Bunkhouse by Dan Barry. This is about a group of men with disabilities in Atalissa, Iowa, and they are basically indentured servants to this poultry factory. And so the story just details these men's lives. It talks about how this factory got away with this for so long, the social workers that were involved in getting them out of that situation, the legal processes that happened that ended up putting this factory and this business out of business, thank goodness. And then it also addresses some of these more systemic issues around disability in America, where here in the United States, we tend to really sequester people with disabilities away into group homes and institutionalized living, essentially. And I think one of the main premises of that is that's got to change, and we really need to work harder at making sure that people with disabilities are integrated into our communities. And I really did enjoy this. For those of you who don't know, I am from Iowa. My boyfriend is actually from the areas where a lot of this story took place in southeastern Iowa. And so this hit really close to home. I've actually met some of the boys from the Bunkhouse. I met them randomly at a theater in Waterloo, Iowa, which is where they are currently living. And yeah, I very much enjoyed the reading experience. I guess enjoy isn't the right word. Appreciate is more the right word. I appreciate the level of detail that this author went into. I appreciate getting to know the backstory of the men better. I appreciate the way that he really brought this issue to light. And sometimes he went a little too far in detail. So, like, for example, there's a scene where the social workers are meeting at McDonald's, and like he's describing the smell of the hamburgers cooking on the griddle, and like, we don't really need to know that. Like, let's just get to what the social workers are doing. So some of it was a little bit overkill. So I ended up giving it 4 stars out of 5. But if you want to know more about some of the things that happen in Iowa, I do recommend this book. A lot of people have a misconception about Iowa, that it's just this quaint small town, everybody helping everybody, nothing bad happens kind of state. But in reality, small town Iowa, there's a lot of dark stuff that happens. I grew up in small town Iowa. There is dark stuff that happens in small town Iowa. And this is just one example of that. So if that's something that interests you, I definitely recommend this book. Next, I started a reread of the Goosebumps series by R.L. Stine. I'm reading these on audiobook. My library has the first 15 books in the series on Hoopla. So I did read Welcome to Deadhouse, which is book 1 in the series, and I loved it. So this is about a family that moves into a new house that they got for free in an inheritance. They get a letter from some random relative that's like, hey, this house is now yours, and they move in, and then spooky things start happening in this house. It's like a really good haunted house story, intense action, good character development, 5 stars out of 5. I enjoyed Welcome to Deadhouse so much that I immediately went into reading the second book in the Goosebumps series, which is Stay Out of the Basement. Stay Out of the Basement was my favorite book in the series when I was a child, so I was really curious to see how it will hold up as an adult, and another 5 stars out of 5. I loved it. So it's about this father who is like, it's a classic mad scientist kind of tale, and he has a bunch of plants in the basement that should not exist. So that's all I'll really say, because I don't want to spoil it for you, but it was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. 5 stars out of 5. Next was another buddy read. I read Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, and I read this with Francois at Mr. Francie Reads. This is the classic swashbuckling pirate tale. It is basically the foundation for how we tell pirate stories today, and I loved this book. I loved this book. I enjoyed every minute of the reading experience. So it is about Jim Hawkins, who's a young man. He runs an inn with his mother, and there's a pirate that stays with them. The pirate gets the black spot. Other pirates come after him, and they find a treasure map in his things. And then Jim gathers together a crew of people to go hunt for the treasure, and shenanigans ensue. There's battles. There's random things that happen that surprise me. I have seen like movie versions of Treasure Island and read parts of Treasure Island as a kid, but I haven't read the full thing or seen the full film, right? So I didn't know all of the story, and some of the stuff in here surprised me, and I was like, oh wow, that's a thing that happened. And Jim made me laugh a lot. he's such a little kid. Like, you forget sometimes that he is just a kid, and then he'll do something and you're like, oh yeah, he's just a kid. So that was really fun. Long John Silver is a great character. He's not someone that I would ever want to know or have in my life, but he is an awesome character to read about. Had a great time with this book. I gave it 4 stars out of 5. Next, I continued on with Goosebumps number 3, which is Monster Blood by R.L. Stine. In this book, 2 kids buy a can of Monster Blood at a store, and the Monster Blood just keeps growing and growing and growing. And you can see why that would be a problem. I gave this book 4 stars out of 5. The last buddy read that I did in the month was The Holo Places by T. Kingfisher, and I read this with Storm. And this is about basically Kara, who finds a portal to another world in her uncle's museum, and she befriends the guy who works at the neighboring coffee shop, whose name is Simon, who I love. I love Simon. Simon was my favorite part of this book. Simon's like this 40-year-old gay man who wears top hats and fingerless gloves and fishnet stockings, and like he's had a really interesting backstory, and I hope she does a spin-off about Simon, because that would be great. I loved Simon. So anyway, they find this other world, and it's not a world that you want to spend a lot of time in, and then things happen, and I'm not going to say much more than that because it will spoil it for you, but I will say if you have read Pet Sematary and enjoyed it, you might like this book because there are a lot of overlapping similarities with Pet Sematary that I picked up on, especially around the creepy elements. Not necessarily the plot or the characters, but the creepy elements are similar to some of the creepy elements in Pet Sematary by Stephen King. So I enjoyed this. I would put this at about a 3.5, but you know, Goodreads and stuff doesn't let you round, or doesn't let you do 0.5 or any kind of decimal points in your rating, so it will be a 3 on my Goodreads, just because there was some exposition in here where Kara and Simon are like trying to figure out, why does the world exist and how does it exist and how did it end up here, and she gets into a lot of like theoretical physics and stuff in these passages, and those parts were boring to me, and I felt like there was just too much of it, and not enough of just continuing the story and continuing the plot. There was too much just like speculation about why is the world here and how did it get here and how do we find it again and what happens if other and what happens if this and what happens if that, and that just was overkill. So 3 stars out of 5, more like a 3.5 out of 5 for The Holo Places. And then the last book that I read in the month was Say Cheese and Die by R.L. Stine. This is book 4 in the Goosebumps series. In this book, a kid finds a camera that is like psychic, or it's either psychic or it makes bad things happen. So for example, it takes a photo of his friend by a tree, only when the photo comes out, the Polaroid, when the photo comes out, she's not there in the photo, and then she goes missing. So it either predicts bad things that are going to happen or it makes the bad things happen. And this one was, I was kind of wondering as the story went on, like, where is this going? You know, but by the end, the culmination of everything was really interesting and unique in how everything concluded. So I still ended up enjoying it, and I gave it 4 stars out of 5. All right, you know that every month I like to pick book of the month for fiction and nonfiction. So my favorite book of the month for fiction was Hollowpox. Of course it's going to be Hollowpox. My favorite book of the month for nonfiction was The Boys in the Bunkhouse by Dan Barry. My favorite general character from this month would have to be Simon from the Holo Places. I actually ended up with 3 book crushes this month. So my first crush is Adam from the Mercy Thompson series. Anytime you bring up the Mercy Thompson series, I'm always going to mention Adam. I have a huge crush on Adam. He's like an alpha male, and an alpha male in a way that I really enjoy. My second crush of the month was Jessica from Dune. Jessica is the mother of the main guy, Paul, and I thought she was pretty great. And my third crush of the month is Jupiter North from Hollowpox. Did you expect anything less? Okay, that'll do it for this month's wrap up. Wow, we made it through another month. How did your reading go this month? Did it go well? I hope it did. Leave any questions or comments or anything that you really want to talk about down in the comments down below. If you just want to let me know that you're here and you made it this far, go ahead and leave an emoji that you feel like is pirate themed for Le Treasure Island. And until next time, make sure that you continue to read good books, drink good coffee, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye!